Grateful that we have Mike Gaziano here and to share. And Mike was born and raised in the Midwest and chose Tucson for his undergraduate work in psychology. He is now a proud alumnus from the University of Arizona.
Yeah.
He later received his master's degree in social work from the University of Illinois, bringing over 25 years of clinical experience to Sierra Tucson. Mike worked in the family program from 2008 to 2017 before he became the manager for the pain recovery program in August 2017. He has worked in the private sector and public sector as a social worker and is trained as a mediator and conflict resolution specialist. Mike also has provided his clinical skills to Pima County as a group facilitator for domestic violence classes. So Mike, we are grateful to have you here and to present. And so take it away, sir.
Thank you very much. All right, this is wonderful. So everything Tim said was a lie. No, I'm just being silly with you all. Let me start off by saying that the topic I wanted to do today is called the evolution of the lie. Now, I felt like I should have music from 2001 Space Odyssey, dun, 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 you know, with the whole thing around the evolution piece. But the point really is that a lie does evolve. And I want to take you back to basically your own childhood experience, your own opportunity to think about growing up and how the lie evolved for you as you have dealt with lies over your life as well. Now, my intent for this lecture is really to do two things. One, to create a little bit of humor, like I like to do, and also to create some challenging thoughts around what it is from a recovery side to understand the concept of the lie, how it impacts you, how it impacts the way that you create the sustainability of your recovery moving forward, and perhaps your intent to sort of reevaluate that true sense of being impeccable with your words, your actions, and your behaviors as you continue your journey of growth and change in your life. Now, if you allow yourselves to realize that these are generality statements when I talk about the evolution of the lie, it's not that everything is relevant for each person. It's more of general statements to give you some thoughts to ponder and to build on. I'm going to start first with this slide. Now, as you look at this slide, two things are important to take into account. One is that this is relatively a young child. Now, I don't know how old this child is, but I would say it's reasonable to think that since they're probably eye level to the counter, maybe 2, 3, or 4, maybe a little bit older. But the point is, look at what the caption says. It says, "Not now," and that's grandma saying that to this child. "Let's save some for tea time." Now, the evolution of the lie may start at this moment after the grandmother and or whoever's watching, we'll call her Gretchen because I like to use that name, watching Gretchen. And so all of a sudden, let's just pretend for a moment that Gretchen really likes those cookies in the cookie jar, and she decides that she's going to reach in. Now, these happen to be chocolate chip cookies. They could be any cookies or donuts or whatever. But there can be sometimes a tendency for donuts or cookies to get a little bit messy when you eat them, especially if you're young. So we'll just pretend for a moment that Gretchen reaches into the cookie jar. She gets one of the cookies and she starts eating it, and it smears over her face a little bit. So this cute little imp of a child has sort of crumbs and cookies, stuffed in her face. And then the grandma or the mom or whoever's watching Gretchen comes in and says, "Hey, did you eat a cookie?" And they look straight at you and they have this beautiful gift of either not saying anything or really not being honest, because they're thinking, and again, they're young, but they're thinking, "I want another cookie because it was a good tasting cookie." The evolution of the lie can happen at that moment where all of a sudden a situation presents itself to a very, very young child. And whether or not they share that they actually took the cookie, or here's the other shift to it, is that I, as a parent, may just start laughing and thinking, "Oh, how cute and how precious it is for her to eat this cookie and to have all these crumbs over her face, that I really don't care whether she ate it or not. I know she did. I can see the evidence, but it starts to be a playful way of how dishonesty or not telling the truth starts to shape the dynamics within a relationship. And again, I'm just sort of taking a small example of how lies can evolve. Now, they can come from other parts of our life and situations as we grow up. What was once said is that we are born and it's a tabula rasa. We're a blank slate, so to speak. And so there really isn't the inherent nature to actually lie or be dishonest. It's something that is learned over a very quick span based on what you're like as a parent or the other people around the child. Now, taking that jump just for one more moment, as now that Gretchen hasn't really been honest with us, but we've been laughing about it. And so she may learn that by observing someone's response to her not being honest or not being, truthful, there's a different way of how she navigates the world going forward. What I found fascinating is this: that whole concept about the cookie and the cookie jar ultimately led to actually storytelling and singing and all sorts of ways that shifts the way that we understand a behavior and the playfulness around it. So I don't know if any of you played this game growing up. I did it a lot as a camp counselor, and you'd go around the room and say, who stole the cookie from the cookie jar? And the person would say, not me. And the interesting thing about not me is now how the lie starts to evolve into a further direction to stop accountability at that point. And again, I'm just trying to be very playful and challenge the thinking a little bit around the process of how lies evolve, and again, how this ties to your own recovery. So all of a sudden, who stole the cookie from the cookie jar? Not me. And then they say, yes, you, and they say, couldn't be. And then the next question is, then who? Now, I want to go forward with our evolution of the lie to talk a little bit about another technique that comes up, and it's learned early on, and it's called the blame game. Now, my daughter's an older adult now. However, when she was going to go to kindergarten, my wife and I went to the kindergarten room with her. And we were sitting there observing the kindergarten room, and there was kids playing around in all sorts of areas, playing with paints, doing all sorts of things. And then in this corner area was these kids playing with some blocks, and they were stacking them up. And there was a little girl near the blocks. And again, don't know her name for our discussion. Of course, we'll call her Gretchen. And of course, Wally's the other one stacking the blocks. But as I'm talking and dealing with the teacher about explaining, for her to explain to us what's going on in the kindergarten room and things that our daughter will learn, there's this loud crash. And all of a sudden there's tears in the room, and there's all these emotions. And of course, everyone draws the attention to where the crash was. Now, the first thing, of course, that happens is the teacher goes over there and consoles Gretchen, and she's crying, and she says the blocks fell and hit her finger, and she was crying. And she looks right at, and we'll call this young man, this child who's probably about 5 now, Wally, and says, did you hit Gretchen with the blocks? And of course he says, no, I was just over here playing. And all of a sudden the blame game starts. And it happened in that classroom, and it happened in that kindergarten room, to where people weren't taking responsibility for their actions, rather shifting that blame to somebody else. And it was fascinating to me, because again, I thought, oh, great. Now my child's going to learn the opportunity of playing the blame game. Not that by any means we were perfect as parents and didn't sort of model some of those behaviors as well. But the point being is she happened to be an only child, so she didn't get a lot of information around how to deal with situations that weren't truthful. And then we looked at the teacher and we go, wow, is this sort of how it happens in here? She goes, well, sometimes kids feel really frightened to be honest about what happened, because maybe they're worried about that consequence. So now we're coming to the next part to the evolution of the lie, which is the avoidance of the consequence. And so starting to formulate a lie that helps in their mind as a young child, as a young person moving through life. How do I avoid a consequence? Because I don't like what happens when I have a consequence. So the lie starts to take another direction of becoming a tool. So not only is it evolving with them after the initial lie and the response and the playfulness of it, after the blame game starts to happen, and the way to sort of avoid the lie is to foster that belief in a blame way so that it moves away from you. And obviously, if you can get a lie to be as far distant from you as you hope for, you're hoping that it won't get back and connect to you. Now, that's one part of how the lie can evolve over time. Here's the other fascinating part to the concept of the evolution of the lie. It becomes something that is perpetuated by us as adults in the way that we start to create deception in our relationship with our children in a very playful way that sometimes can start to foster a level of trust questioning. Now, I happen to be going around to some Goodwill stores recently because they finally opened up a little bit. And I like to get shirts and fun things from the Goodwill places. And I was going through this one area and I noticed that there was a tooth fairy pillowcase holder that I remember we had gotten something like that for our daughter. I think she was probably 18 months and had a couple teeth starting to be cut and, maybe starting to think about when that first one was going to get lost of the baby teeth. And you get that tooth fairy pillow where, of course, the intent is you put that little pillow under their pillow, and then you have the tooth in there. And then, of course, there's the miraculous opportunity for the tooth fairy to come in and sort of, exchange it with something that the child would like. Now, I didn't come from a very lucrative family around the tooth fairy world, so it was usually like a marble for me, which was really cool or something that I liked. But the point is that we as adults create illusions and deceptions to share with our children to create sort of an enjoyment and a fantasy, yet sometimes it becomes a perpetuation of information that's truly not honest and in some ways is deceptive. And again, I'm not creating judgment as I talk with you or foster a sense of blame, just understanding the importance of how lies continue to take shape. So of course, for me, I have the thing when I'm with my child, and of course I put it under her pillow when she was sleeping. And so I go in around midnight and want to, exchange the tooth that she had lost with a Susan B. Anthony gold medallion coin. And so I'm under there at her pillow, grabbing that little tooth fairy case. And of course, she opens her eyes, looks at me. I said, Bella, you have to be really quiet because I think the tooth fairy showed up already and may have left something in your pillow. And all of a sudden, a new technique comes into play for understanding the evolution of the lie. When in doubt, stack. So what I'm saying is, when in doubt of being caught with the lie, sometimes you can stack one lie on top of another lie, right? And then all of a sudden you create a couple new lies, and it sort of creates a facade around what really happened. And so, of course, for me, that was what I was doing with my child. Was she caught me literally red-handed, right, with me under her pillow getting the thing, and I looked at her and said, be quiet because they've already been here and I'm just going to check on it. So children sometimes learn that once a lie starts and it evolves and they've learned part of the blame game, they've also learned the concept of when in doubt, stack the lie up on top of another one. Now, here's the interesting thing about the stacking of lies is that sometimes they get really high with multiple lies that go on top of each other to where it starts to teeter and fall. Now, the belief then is when in fear, stack higher. I think many of you can relate from a recovery point as well as a relapse point that part of the struggle of relapse is that itty bitty committee, the thinking process, and some of the lies and the deception that comes from that relapse behavior. And again, I'm not saying that it's solely learned by your childhood experiences. I'm merely saying that it can help to shape the way that you deal with things and have a hard time with your own accountability and responsibility when it comes to some of the ways that you start to falter and fall back into old habits that certainly can be problematic for you. So again, I'm trying to tie both sides of the evolution of the lie to also what the recovery side looks like for all of you, and the importance of understanding, again, that concept of learning to become more impeccable with your words and actions and the way that you behave. So with that sort of jump that I made from the childhood and from the tooth fairy, I want to go a little bit further into understanding this evolution piece. Now, we said that sometimes the lie can create deception in the relationship. And as adults, sometimes we may perpetuate that deception based on our behaviors and actions towards our children or those that we're caring for. Here's the other piece to this. Now, sometimes as children start to become, maybe in their 10 to 12-year-old range, they might start to have a real strong sense of what's right or wrong and want to sort of hold people accountable to being honest and truthful. Matter of fact, if you talk to some of the teachers that have worked with third and fourth graders, they'll say, yeah, some of these kids are honest to a fault. They'll be very honest about what they've done, and they'll also point out what the behaviors are from other people that they see, especially if they're asked about it. Now, one of the things that we can sometimes learn is that if there's a fear around the consequence, like we said, especially about telling that truth or being honest about something, sometimes we have learned to create crafty ways to not actually lie, rather to omit the truth. And what I find fascinating about the concept of omitting the truth rather than actually saying that it was a lie is I've gone on to like C-SPAN and other places and watched people testifying, adults testifying in front of juries or senators or whatever the heck it is. And you'll hear phrases from these adults, these adult people saying, to the best of my knowledge, I can't relate that information, or I have exhausted my memory, or I do not recall, or I do not know. And what I'm merely saying to you is, here you go again in the way that lies evolve, how they learn to create the deception, and also how they learn to start to shift and to manipulate words to avoid the consequence and the accountability. In recovery, I think it's fair to say that for some of you out there, and it may not be for all of you out there, that there are times that you will omit the truth, or perhaps say, I don't recall this, even though you know it to be true, to try to shift the focus away so that you don't actually tell the person you're lying, you're merely omitting what's going on and what facts are and what behaviors are. Maybe in some ways you learn those strategies early on. And again, we see it through the media, we see it through the ways adults talk to each other. And the other thing that I thought was interesting was the concept of a fib. So going back a little bit to that adolescent and that early childhood or young adult / adolescent point, sometimes the phrases that would be heard is, did you fib about that? And it became a new way, a different way to be able to say, yes, you fibbed, but it didn't really bring about the story of, did you lie? Because lie feels to be more harsh in the way it's looked at. Now, again, going just forward one more time to our recovery work, many of you have heard that over time, denial becomes a huge part of a relapse, right? And I know over time, some of you realize that denial can mean, don't even know I'm lying, So my point is that you've learned over time to deny, to omit, to not be truthful, because the further you distance yourself, the further you are connected to that behavior. That can often happen in a relapse side, because the itty bitty committee up here will sometimes convince you to create deception, manipulation, perpetuation of distortions to avoid the accountability and the responsibility. That, I think, is again part of the ways that the lies have evolved over time and have started to tie into how our way of managing our relationships and the way that we look at our own responsibility, plays out. Now let's go back one more time to the adolescent piece. Gretchen now is in her late teens and she's dealing with other relationships. She's learned when she was 10 to 12, if she was too truthful or truthful to a fault, that sometimes that got her into more trouble, where she was, quote, a tattletale, or she was, quote, narking on somebody. So again, all of these things are the ways that the lie evolves and starts to manifest and morph into a tool that we often will use to, distance ourselves from our behaviors or actions, or not want to be fully accountable to what the consequences come when we do engage in these behaviors. So the older adolescent, young adult has now learned, I need to sort of modify the way that I communicate to people. I need to work on ways to share what I want, but do it so that, quote, they don't think that I'm, narking on them or being a tattletale, rather challenging some of the ways of the behaviors that don't feel consistent for me and that I need to be truthful about. Quick little story, and some of you may have heard it over the years, when my brother was heading off to college, and I think I was in that 12 to 10 range. So I was really wanting to be very mindful about not lying and being impeccable with what I see and share my concerns. He was leaving to head off to college, and I noticed in his suitcase what I believed to be tobacco and some rolling papers that I had seen on TV or something like that. And so this is like 1972. And so I told my mom and dad, hey, Joe's heading off to college and I'm worried that he's going to smoke cigarettes and that he's got tobacco and rolling papers in his suitcase as he's leaving to head to college. Well, two things happened. Yes, I was very direct and very honest with what I observed. And the other piece was I basically called my brother out to my parents without realizing it, that it wasn't tobacco. This is 1973. It was weed, and he was going off to college with his rolling machine to smoke weed in 1973. Needless to say, my honesty and my desire to be forthright and to not lie and not to cover up, rather to shine the light because I was worried about my brother, did not go over very well between me and my brother. And actually there was some tension for the first probably 6 months he was away in college, because of course they were very concerned that my brother was heading off to college to, get high. And again, this is in 1973. So the point being is, when you start to become impeccable with your word, there is another consequence which creates sometimes problems within relationships, because sometimes people don't want you to be that honest. They want you to sort of perpetuate the deception or the lie or the manipulation so they can, continue to engage in the behavior and not have the consequence or responsibility for that behavior. So it's interesting when you think about it that you're taught to tell the truth in some ways, you're taught to sort of become deceptive in other ways. And you have to find a balance between all of those things to deal with your life, to deal with your recovery, and to deal with your relationships. So here's the challenging part to this discussion at this point. As you've been sitting here and listening to some of the ways that the lie, the evolution of the lie takes shape, how it becomes perpetuated by other behaviors and actions we do or we observe in our lives growing up, as well as our interaction with those that are in a caretaker role and also those around us, from our friends, our colleagues, all these different people in our lives. We've been challenged ongoing, and even from today's topic, to determine, do I lie? How do I lie? And what is the purpose of the lie? As you're moving forward in your recovery, as you're moving forward in your commitment for self-care, it's important to acknowledge, yes, you lie at times. I mean, there are times you're going to lie, and it may be that it's, quote, a small lie or a little lie. And again, that's because we're human. There's things that we're not going to always, talk about and be fully honest with. There's that old phrase, discretion is the better part of valor. In other words, sometimes you need to be discreet on how you respond to someone and not have to be completely truthful where it's going to hurt them. I mean, that even ties to that ninth step, right? When you make those amends, except wanting to do so would hurt them. So again, going back to the concept of how we're trying to deal with the way we communicate, how we look at being impeccable with our words, how we look at ways to, be healthier for ourselves and those around us, we're going to be constantly challenged, because the lie will continually sort of morph itself in front of us in ways that we have to determine, Is it that we're attempting to lie, to manipulate, coerce, or get what we want from somebody? Or are we attempting to lie to sort of reduce some of what they're needing to experience and deal with? I find this to be a part of my struggle as a therapist, and as well as a parent and a spouse and with other relationships. Sometimes I don't see behaviors that are congruent for my moral compass, and I may choose to point them out or ask for clarity with somebody, and it may not always go over very well. But the point is this: you have to determine for yourself, are you helping people by shining a light on a behavior, or are you feeling like maybe they're feeling shamed by that? And if they are, sometimes you can just simply say to somebody, if you're open to the observation I have right now, I'd like to share some thoughts. And if they say, you know what, really not open to your observations, then you can say, okay, when you're ready to hear some of my observations about what's been going on in our relationship or what I'm observing in your behavior, I'm certainly willing to share them. And keep in mind, many times when we attempt to share or to provide information to somebody, we don't know what the outcome's going to be. So do things in a way that doesn't set yourself up for an expectation that someone's going to go, oh, thank you for that. And a perfect example, which is a really challenging one, is as adults, if we know that somebody is engaging in a very harmful behavior or maybe engaging in an affair with somebody, and we know that this is happening, and we have a friend that we care about, how do we decide? Do we share that information with them? Do we perpetuate the lie and the deception because we don't want to create the conflict or the rift within the relationship? And I'm just going to be very clear with all of you. There is no right or wrong way to make that determination. And sometimes it might help you talking with others, probably on a professional side, to mediate your thoughts around, hey, I know this, how do I work with it? Because again, you don't have control over the results of what you choose to share. And it can be a challenge to be impeccable and genuine and be real with your moral compass, present those concerns, and realize that sometimes it may not go as well as you think. And I bring that to the discussion just because part of recovery is to, especially if you're a sponsor, is to point out and lovingly kick the person in the butt and say, hey, this is clear that you're heading in a healthy way again. And so you have to determine when and where and how you want to be able to share your concerns and the importance of those concerns. Now, as I get to sort of the transition point of our time together today, I'm going to put another slide up. And again, tying back to self-care, tying back to ways that you want to reduce some of the old patterns of that lie that evolved in the ways that you have mastered it over the years. It's about the sustainability of that recovery for yourself as you move forward in your life. Now, here's an interesting one: is if you look at these key areas that are important to build on for your recovery, and also keeping in mind what we've just been talking about, if someone says to you, are you really doing some physical self-care? And you've been in this COVIDian world right now where it's been sometimes difficult to get to the gym or get to places where you can do the physical self-care. And instead of maybe creating an illusion that you are doing things that are healthy for you, you can be honest with someone if it's true and say, you know what, that's something I need to work on still, because it's been hard sometimes for me to get out or get going because of some of the limits that have happened. Yet physical self-care is going to be an ongoing challenge for all of us, and to be doing it in a way that's genuine and real, and maybe bringing others in to engage in activities where you all can get going and doing things that are physical for that self-care. Second question, again, is looking at your own recovery and being honest with yourself right now as you're sitting here in the Zoom with me. Is your lifestyle as it is at the present time helping to foster that sustainability of your recovery? And if it's not, what parts of that lifestyle are sort of deceptions, lies, manipulations, or things that are not you being honest with yourself about? And are you willing to maybe reevaluate some of the lifestyle of where you're living and how you're living, to look at, I need to reevaluate my sustainability piece, especially around the ways that I looked at things, and being more honest about that with myself. That third area around mental and emotional self-care, again, being honest, being truthful about what your experience is. Sometimes it's hard to do these things on a daily basis, and that we may start to slip and say, you know what, I really want to be more healthy in my mental and emotional self-care, yet life gets in the way. This pandemic has gotten in the way. My relationships have gotten in the way. Ask yourself, when you're saying those things, are you really just trying to stack information that maybe is truthful, maybe isn't? Or is there a fear that's going on with you, so you're stacking higher to try to create distance from some of the ways that you haven't been honest around what that's looked like for you? That fourth area around finding people of support, sometimes it's hard to feel comfortable reaching out to people. I'm hoping this weekend, although it's a little bit wonkier than the ways we've done things in the past here, I'm very grateful that Tim and the team was able to come up with a way for us to still interact with each other and talk about tools and strategies that support, although sometimes may not be in an immediate sense face-to-face, Zoom or phone or other ways virtually to reach out and still have that support. I hope you're finding this weekend you can still connect with people and sort of reestablish a new norm of how it is to have that support when sometimes it may not be immediately available to you face to face. And then that fifth area, and again, that's always been sort of whatever fits best for you. And if there's a part of you that sort of struggles with, not sure about what's honestly going on for you when it comes to that fifth level, that spiritual and self-care point, just ask yourself that question: am I feeling uncomfortable looking at sort of what's going on for me? And am I sort of creating some deceptions and or not being honest by not being truthful what I need? Again, it's not about religion or anything specifically. It's merely about, is there part of me that's feeling empty that I need to work on and create mindfulness or meditation, or allow nature or space or just the beauty of the outdoors and things to be able to re-embrace with me? Because with the quarantine that we've all experienced, many of you didn't get an opportunity at times to sort of get out and engage. And so your self-care can come from reflection, from mindfulness, and from sort of a meditative way that you can sort of do a moral inventory and say, are these 5 areas places that sometimes I'm not being truthful or honest about what I need to do to foster that sustainability in my recovery? So as I've been sharing with you today and talking a little bit about how these two things can tie together, I want to open up some discussion if you're willing to ask some questions, and I'll look and see if there's anything that I can respond to over what we've talked about today. So any thoughts or questions around what I've been sharing with you today and some of the ways that maybe this has been able to tie into your own recovery?
Yes, and if anybody has any questions, just submit it through the...
How can I hold myself accountable? Well, I guess the question is, when you talk about accountability, how are you going to measure the accountability? If part of the accountability is measured by the fact that you want to sort of re-examine yourself, then what you're basically doing is starting the accountability process, because you're willing to look within yourself to say, let me determine where are these areas that I need to sort of shore up or build upon, and hold myself accountable to sort of following through with that task. I can tell you this: one of the best ways to hold yourself accountable is sometimes to acknowledge that complacency can often get in the way of our commitment to the sustainability of our recovery in our lives. What is a good way to have a spouse join in with the 5 steps that I presented? Here's a cool question about that. What you're basically saying is, what's a good way for those that I love and care about to see some of the things that I'm learning and experiencing, and offering this to them as parts of the ways that I think they could help themselves? So again, let's go back to that premise. Are you open for me sharing some thoughts that I feel could be helpful, that I'm using and learning to help myself, that maybe are things that you could also benefit from if you're willing to hear it? So a good way to to have them join in is invite them on that journey that you're on by merely saying, hey, these are some really cool things I'm learning about my own self-care. And if you think about that 12th step, you know, having come to what you've learned, showing it through your actions and your behaviors and helping those around you. So I see it really as a 12th step discussion point is you're helping them based on the ways that you live your life, and then inviting them to be able to experience it if they want to. Other questions? How do you show compassion over ego? What a fascinating question. If we look just briefly at ego as the state of how I see myself and the way I present myself, if I'm egotistical and I inflate and distort the way I see myself, sometimes that can pollute a genuineness around what's going on. The compassion side is basically saying, because I'm human, because I have flaws and I'm not perfect, it's okay sometimes to acknowledge that within myself and still have a sense of positivity and self-worth by embracing the compassion as well as understanding. I look at this and say, I'm a good person. Sometimes my behaviors and actions are not congruent with the person that I am, and working that out in a way that feels genuine and real for yourself. The intent was to sort of be playful yet challenging our thinking process. I plan to really build on this concept of the evolution of the lie as I continue to explore it more, because I really feel it's been a huge journey that all of us take that may have not realized how it shapes our own recovery direction based on the way that deception, that manipulation, that avoidance, those things that we've learned and have fine-tuned over time to avoid has affected our recovery and the way that we manage our recovery. Here's the funny thing, just as a note, I didn't realize how much I lied until I got sober. This was very helpful, and thank you so much. You know, that's a beautiful point, is that when your head, that itty bitty committee, isn't as clouded and as polluted as it used to be, and you start to shine lights on your patterns and actions and choices you've made, there's a tremendous humbling that can come from that. And it isn't to foster shame, it's to foster compassion and realization that, wow, this took tolls on me in ways I never fully understood, and to the people that I love and care about in ways that I didn't realize. And again, now I can, you know, work a program that says, I want to be as best and impeccable, my word, in the way that I handle things, not to always take things so personally. You know, some of those 4 agreements that you may have read or heard about. But the point is, I'm glad that as you find that commitment of mental and emotional and chemical sobriety, that you gain clarity and understanding around that. How can you help the 10 to 12-year-olds figure out their journey through truth and lies? Wow. To be clear and honest with you, it's sitting down with those children and explaining what we talked about here today, that as you see things and as you experience and want to be truthful to those that you love and care about and to the adults in your life, sort of encouraging them to check in with you as sort of one of the moral compasses that hopefully is guiding them in the right direction, so that they're able to, you know, use you as a soundboard to say, hey, I really want to confront Gretchen in my class tomorrow, because I see her constantly bullying this other person, and I'm just not okay with it, and it's really upsetting to me. I mean, I think it's important for us to have further dialogue with our 10 to 12-year-olds, ask them to feel comfortable to share some of their concerns, so that you don't minimize or dismiss what they're saying and say like, oh, that's silly, or that's not going to be a problem. Always be very respectful and mindful. When they come to talk to you, listen, and then ask them, you know, how can you be helpful? And also ask them, what are you wanting me to understand about what you shared with me?